right, I'm going to start right on the dot here. Thanks for coming. We only have 20 minutes to go over what I've spent the last 6 or 7 years doing, so I've got to go fast. This is me. I work for Centric Consulting in the States. They gave me this fancy shirt. I've written a couple books, including one on this, and I get to play with race cars once in a while. So if you want to talk about race cars, find me over there and we can talk the rest of the night. Trust me. This is a little bit more about me. The only two things that matter here is I'm involved. I help run my local user group at home. If this is your first time at BITS or something like this, thank you, and please come back. Being involved in this world kind of changed my life, so I hope that for all of you as well, and if you want to chat about that, we can. Like I said, I've led projects like this for years and years, so I'm hoping that the next 19 and a half minutes, some of what I've learned, some of what I've done that was good, some of it that wasn't good, helps you as well. Feedback. So I would love questions during the session. 20 minutes is going to make that hard. So please do the feedback, because this is only the session's second time out. So I obviously want to improve it for next time. And if we can't do questions here, which seems unlikely, come find me in the expo hall after this with what your question is, and the first person to find me gets a free copy of that book about this. So I am not above bribing you to come talk to me. All right, so there's basically 9 things, and obviously we're going to go through this quick. There's 9 questions we have to ask ourselves, and that will get us, hopefully, to a successful ending and a migration that went well. So this may seem silly, but the first thing we have to ask is what? So what are we migrating? So a lot of times this starts with data teams, most of us here, right? Well, what kind of data? The last time I gave this talk, somebody asked and said, well, what about like enterprise data warehouses? And I thought that was interesting because I've been a part of projects where the intention was to move that. But the pace of development in the cloud and how cool that stuff is and how powerful it can be means I've never actually migrated one. We said, well, we'll leave it there. We're going to move that to one of the more powerful cloud platforms. So we're going to stick, when we're talking data here, could be unstructured. It's likely SQL Server, relational type data, right? Could be Oracle Postgres, something like that, but since it's a Microsoft Data Platform conference, we'll stick with SQL. Like I said, the data teams end up running this, but that's not the only thing that's going to move. If you move the data and your servers, your apps, your middleware, whatever, stays on-prem, you're going to have a problem. You've introduced latency you don't have. You've introduced latency you probably haven't designed for either. So we don't want to do that, so we want to have a cohesive plan. And we're going to talk about this later. We want to bring other teams into this too. So if this all falls on us, that's not really fair. There's other kind of oddball things we need to think about too. So these last 2 points are really, really important. If you have an on-prem data center and somebody links to it for whatever reason, VPN, they get data, something, you're going to have to move that. If you don't move that, you really can't get out of that. Other oddball things. So basically anything you can think of, and it's why, and we'll talk about this in a slide or two, it's why you want to engage your operational teams early, because they're going to know, oh yeah, we've got this mainframe that sits over there, and somebody needs a file off of it, and that's got to go to the cloud somehow as well. So think about, it seems silly, but start with, what are we moving? The next point is, why are we moving this stuff? So this matters, and we don't have time to get into it here. But the motivation for moving this stuff, this data, these apps, all of that, is going to change the technical decision you make. You may choose a different platform in the interest of speed, in the interest of cost, something like that. So again, are we trying to save money? Did your boss come to you and said, we've got to shave bottom line this year, and it's the year of the cloud, go to the cloud and save me some money. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Are we just getting out of data centers as fast as we possibly can? Contracts are up, rent increase, something like that. We may not go to the technical platform that we would want to, but in the interest of speed, we're going to get out of there really, really fast. So think about that. And this third point could just be your CTO went to the CTO roundtable, and everybody said, we're going to the cloud. How about you? And they said, yeah, I guess we are. And then they came back and said, hey team, we're gonna go to the cloud. So there may not be a motivation, it may not be cost savings, it may not be getting out of a data center, it may just be wanting to fit in at the next CTO roundtable. That can happen. If you're supporting environments on SQL Server 2008 or 2012, and those Windows Server versions as well, if you move those to Azure, you get extended support for 3 more years. So if you're stuck on-prem because you have an environment that's got some years on it, I hope you don't, but a lot of us do, then that may be a motivation. You're not going to get support for it now, but if it goes to the cloud, you can. So who do we need to do the work? Again, this seems silly, right? But it's not just data teams. So networking knowledge is very, very important. Your data team may or may not have that. Your operations team hopefully does. If you don't, it's worthwhile to go outside and get that. Because if you're moving to the cloud, doesn't matter which cloud it is, you're going to spend more time on network type stuff than you think. Trust me. So make sure you have those skills. Make sure your operations people are brought in early. They're going to be really a fundamental part of this. You know, the data people may do a lot of the movement of the data. Maybe the database servers go to VMs in some cloud, whatever. The operations people are they're going to do the plumbing. They're going to do all the stuff that maybe we don't know how, or maybe we don't have time. Your security people are going to be interested in this as well. Bring them in early, because in most orgs, they have the ability to stop the thing dead in its tracks. And we don't want to fund this. We don't want to get all these teams spun up and bring the security person in late, and they said, your approach is no good. We're not going to validate that. Stop. We don't want that to happen. I've been on projects where it does. It's no fun for it to happen, and it's even less fun to explain it. Bring in your app devs and their bosses and things like that. So if you're wholly getting out of on-prem and moving everything to the cloud, you likely have some home-built applications or applications that you brought in-house and are supporting now that have to go with it. Well, your choice of cloud platform may depend on changes that those app devs may or may not make. And it could be because they don't have time, it could be because they don't want to, it could be because they can't. So think about that, bring them in early. If there are kind of oddball or apps that you own that you're gonna have to move, you need to have a chat with them about, there are things in the guts of this maybe that you have to change, and then you and them can go back and forth about that. Your data people are important, but note here that they're fifth. So we're critical, but everybody else on this list is too. Last but not least, consultants, partners, whatever. And you may say, Matt, you just said you worked for a consultancy in the States. You're here to sell me stuff. No, because I wrote this slide well before I worked there. These projects are really hard. They put an amazing amount of stress on your team. And oftentimes, you've noted all these folks, a lot of these people are part of your operational day-to-day stuff. You're already busy. That team's probably already understaffed, probably overworked. You are being handed with this kind of work another full-time job. And it is not fair of your employer to expect your team to do both. I've been on projects where people went to the hospital because the deadlines were too big. I was one of them. So please don't do this. So if you're looking at your team and yourself and saying, I really can't do any more, and I've just been given this whole other 40 plus hours per week, stand up for yourself. Stand up for your team. We can talk about that over there. Some things that have worked for me, some things that haven't, but it's really important. This will take more time than you think. It will take more work than you think. There's nothing wrong with bringing in outside help. So where's our stuff going? So we haven't gotten to that yet, but it's important. So your cloud decision may not be wholly in your hands. You may be somewhere where you've got things in a couple clouds and you have your pick. You may be somewhere where you have something in no clouds. This is all brand new, and then we can kind of drive what that is. Odds are there's probably a contract for something somewhere and you're going to have to abide by what that is. There's probably new skills you're going to have to learn and maybe new acronyms as well. So you're going to hear people say, well, is the data going to go to an IaaS type thing, PaaS, a blend of the two, whatever. If you're sitting out there and saying, Matt, I don't know what that means, I've got you covered. So there's a pizza version of this slide, but it's not really eating time, so I used the boring version. So basically, IaaS and PaaS are those two middle columns. So IaaS is, odds are, what we're used to. So it's a VM in a cloud somewhere. So it's not in a data center you own. It's in Microsoft, Amazon, Google, whatever. But you're still managing all that stuff, patches, updates, security, antivirus, all that fun stuff. PaaS is all that's managed for you. You're worrying about the data and the apps, and that's it. And I would say this, and this is not a universal truth, so please don't tweet. Matt said that this is the only way to save money in the cloud. It's not what I said. But if your aim, going back to that slide, is we need to save money, platform as a service sometimes is your best opportunity to do just that, because you can consolidate there. Your operational costs sometimes are less. So if your boss has said, listen, we just have to cut cost, PaaS is not, those services are not going to magically do that for you, but it's your best opportunity to do that. And again, we can talk about that more later, but I do want you to think about that. So you chose a cloud, maybe you didn't. So this is obviously a very brief version of kind of comparative services that a lot of us might be dealing with across the three main clouds. I don't have to read those out, but if you're in Azure, then your VMs are just Azure VMs. If you're in Amazon, they're EC2, so on and so forth. What I do want to point you to, and I'm not here recommending one cloud over the other, but Azure's migration tooling, I think, is superior to the other two. So if you're getting into this with a team that's really, really green, not familiar with this, Azure's experience has come a long way. It's a little friendlier. So I'm not recommending one over the other, but think about that. And that brings us to this last point. Remember the skills and experience of the teams that are here. What do they bring to the table? If they're really advanced, really experienced, then you're going to have a lot of flexibility with what you can do, what you can script. Maybe the tooling doesn't matter, and you can just pick the cloud and their solutions that are perfect. If your team is not that way, then you have to think about what all the clouds bring to the table in terms of ease of use, ease of operations, those sorts of things. There we go. Okay, so I'm not going to read through all these, but let's say we chose Azure. Microsoft's booth is obviously over there. I'm going to guess the majority of the folks in this room, if you haven't migrated stuff already, you're going to land some things in Azure somewhere. This is the fastest run through I can possibly do of what those possible options for data are. So we've got Azure SQL database. There's a bunch of flavors of that. I have a link on my resources slide of a video I did for Microsoft a year ago now, where it kind of walks through, if you've never made one of these, creating it from scratch and what all these options are. There's multiple service tiers and all that. We'll go over a couple of the classes of those here in a second. There's also Azure SQL Managed Instance, which is basically if you want Enterprise Edition SQL in the cloud, but you want the backups, the high availability, all that, to be mostly taken care of for you, there's a caveat there, mostly. Managed Instance is the way you'll want to go. It is not inexpensive, but if you're interested in that, a good bit of the Microsoft team is here, and you can chat with them about that. It's a product offering that's come a long ways. If you're coming from on-prem and you have a semi-complicated high availability setup, then this third point here is going to be important. So you've got general purpose offerings in these different things. And that basically means your compute and your storage don't live in the same place. Business critical is expensive, but it means all that lives in the same place. And what you're going to get with a lot of that is an always-on AG type of architecture. So when I say the high availability is built in, it's mostly true. We can talk about cross regions and some of that. But if you're moving a lot of always-on AGs or something like that to the cloud, think about services like this and not moving your exact setup up, because the cloud does give you the ability and sometimes the time to rethink the way you want to do this and make it easier. We've also got hyperscale. That's for massive workload. So if you've got a database that takes a data backup, hyperscale is going to be your friend. Serverless, terrible name. There are servers involved, but it spins up and down depending on how much perf you actually need out of it. And as we saw during the keynote yesterday, there's serverless hyperscale as well. So how do I pick? I can't tell you here because I don't know what the motivations are, what your budget is, all of that. Think about how much time you have to bring a system back. Think about how much data you can afford to lose. That's that first point. Think about what SLAs are you under. Do you have 12 hours to bring things back or 12 minutes? What's your budget? That matters. If you got a bunch of money, you can buy a lot of cool stuff. The database migration assistant for SQL Server databases is your friend because it will not only tell you across different versions what will break, but it will also tell you, okay, hand me a workload, I'll look at it, and I'll say, I think you need a managed instance with 8 vCores or something like that. So if you're looking at this and you're like, this is a mess, I have no idea what to buy, the Azure SQL SKU thing within DMA will help you out, and it's scriptable as well. It's not just going to work, so let's make sure we test it. If you're sitting there and saying, gee, we really don't monitor anything, we haven't baselined anything, let's talk afterwards. I've got a lot of tips and tools that can help you there, but make sure you test this. Don't just say like, well, Matt said managed instance was enterprise edition. That's expensive. It's got to be fast. We'll just throw a bunch of data on that. May or may not work. You really want to test the cloud target you're going to pick to make sure that it makes sense for you and your team. Now we get to the how. So again, depending on the cloud, the tools differ, like we said. Azure Migrate, marketing calls it kind of an umbrella experience. So depending on whether you're moving a database, a server, whatever, it is a nice experience if you have a team that's inexperienced. You can just say, move this, and it will kind of walk them through that and get them to the service that they need. For databases, Amazon DMS is kind of a similar thing. You'll notice the tooling for GCP is in quotes. It's mostly scripting. That tooling, I would say, is not mature at all. So for migrating SQL Server stuff, how can we do this? I wish I had time to go through all this, but I want to highlight a couple things. You'll see replication on there. Yeah, it's nasty, right? But it's tried and true, and it's still a good way to move data, even up to the cloud, even managed services. There's also, if you're not familiar with that Azure Data Studio, play with it. It's really cool. There's a migration extension in there. A lot of the Azure tooling is moving towards that. So that can be a nice experience, more of a GUI, so if your team's not comfortable scripting things, that can be really, really nice, and it is changing month to month. So if you look at it now, you're like, it's not great, it'll be better next month. For managed instances, there are specific things that we can do there that the other services don't do. So I put Azure Data Studio on there again because I really want you to walk out of here and have a look at it because it's a nice bit of tooling. But managed instance, you've got LRS and MI Link, which they talked about during the keynote as well. Those are unique to this. They're both GA now and can be a good way to get a bunch of data over to those. So when are we going to do this? We have to set firm dates. We have to tell people over and over and over again. Don't just say, well, I sent an email 6 weeks ago that said we're moving it on date X. Tell them every week, every day. Mind your internal processes as well. You close out billing, end of month, end of quarter, end of week, something like that. Take note if there are clients that hook into your stuff. If you take something down on a day when they need your stuff, that's not going to go well. So take note of that and make sure you work around that as well. And make sure you've minded people's schedules too. Back to the point where we're really asking a team to work 2 jobs. If your boss doesn't let you bring in help, you should go somewhere else. In the meantime, make sure that you schedule for people to get night sleep, to get naps. You cannot do your whole job if you've been up the whole night. Trust me. So who's doing it? Build the team early. We went over all the different teams we might need. Pull your folks out of that and say, this is our group. Practice it. Plan for problems to happen. Simulate those as much as you can. This is something we can talk about over there. And prepare for things to break. Make sure you've got a backup plan for everything. We won't control every bit and byte that we have to do with this, so make sure you've got a rollback plan because you don't want to be the one to make that phone call that says, we're down and we're stuck. Trust me. And last but not least, if you're part of a data team, you're part of an operations infra type team, cloud spend's going to land on us. So communicate all the way through why the choices were made, what the positives are, what the negatives are, and what that means. And it's okay to say, we had to make this choice because the dev teams won't fix their code in time, but it is going to be too expensive. We'll be over budget by this much until they tune their code or let us tune their code or whatever. That third point is very important. If you're ever in a meeting that says, we'll fix our code when we're in the cloud, it never happens. So set those expectations up front. So, real quick, what is moving? Why is it moving? Who do we need? Where's it going? Have we tested it? Please do. How are we moving it? When are we moving it? Who is moving it? And have we looked out for the team in this process as well? My wife gets a kick out of this if people buy books, but again, you can come chat with me and get a free one. Feedback, I want it, please send it. Even if it's negative, just tell me why. I am SQL at speed everywhere online. That's all the different ways to find me, tweet at me, LinkedIn, all that. And here's the resources. These are up on my GitHub right now. And I got really, really close. So thank you so much. And I'll be over there for the next 45 minutes and hope to talk to some of you. Thank you.